How are y'all doing? Hey, Bootcamp 2019. I am so excited to be here. If I haven't met you yet, my name is Jeremy, and I'm a small group leader here. And this bootcamp is actually really special for me because it's my 10th bootcamp. I've been doing bootcamp, I guess, now for a decade, which is pretty crazy to think about. And my very first bootcamp happened a while ago, and it was with this guy right here. This is Jordan and I back in the day at our very first bootcamp. This was when Bieber hair was in. Jordan had some cool shades, I guess. And so, but that was our first boot camp, and I came as a result of an invite for, many of us guys, we come to church camp for this reason. It was an invite from a girl, and lucky for me, she has yet to figure out how out of my league she actually is. And we've been married for about 3 years now. Her name is Ashley. She's incredible, and this is our little family right here, our 2 boys and us. And that is Ashley, that is Breck. He's our happy-go-lucky golden retriever, and then Bear is our sad old man dog that we have. And this is our millennial picture that we take, trying to get the dog family picture. And then here's another one that we tried to capture, but Brett kind of ruined with this face. And Bear kind of looks like an Ewok from Star Wars, if y'all have ever seen that before. And so, but anyways, that's our family, and lucky for me, I am living proof that you can marry up both figuratively and literally, because my wife is 3 inches taller than me. So for all of you short guys in the room, I just want to say there is hope for you. Yes. Matt Keeney, there is hope for you. So there is hope for you guys. But I am forever grateful that Ashley invited me to boot camp that year, not just because we're married, but because I've kind of accumulated all these stories and experiences over the years, all these memories from boot camp. That very first year on night 3 or 4, I remember we were in the cabins and it was lights out, so lights were out, but we were still talking and joking around. And we had a speaker, and we were playing some music on this speaker. And I remember it was we just had fun songs we were playing, and then somebody, I don't remember who it was, but somebody put this song on right here. Does anybody know this song? Fix You by Coldplay, right? This is one of the best songs of all time, I think. And this song came on, and it got quiet in our cabin, and all of a sudden this emotional, spiritual things started to happen amongst me and these other guys. There was 12 of us in the cabin. That was the entire camp was 12 guys that year. And we're just listening to this in complete silence. And then it gets to the part where the guitar builds right here, right? The guitar builds. And it was it almost brought us to tears for some reason. I think we were just sleep deprived and I don't know. But we were almost crying here in this moment. And what's cool about this moment is I remember it from 10 years ago. And when I talk to those guys now today, we always go back and we were man, remember that song, Fix You? When that played, that was crazy. And nothing really happened. We were just that was crazy. That was such a good memory. And that's my favorite memory from the first time I came to boot camp. And then fast forward just a couple of years, and I graduated high school. I went to Vista Ridge. Any Vista Ridge Rangers in the room? Yeah. So I went to Vista Ridge, graduated, and I decided to come back as an intern for boot camp at Camp 75. So I came back as an intern. That was a blast. I loved doing that. And about night 3 or 4, we had a theme night, and it was Bring Your Own Theme. And so we were, us interns were going, okay, we got to have the best theme, obviously. And so, what are we going to do? And one of us had gone to Goodwill and found a set of jerseys, Dream Team jerseys, a full set. And so we dressed up as the Dream Team. It said Dream Team on the back, a DT on the front. That's my friend Dalton Darrow, Jordan and I back in the day. And what was cool about that night is we did a Nukem tournament. And for those of you who know me, I'm really good at sports balls. I just love playing sports. Not really, I'm being completely sarcastic with that. I'm horrible at sports. But we played Nukem. And for whatever reason, when we play Nukem, I just forget that I'm bad at sports, and I get so fired up. And then I'm the first guy out, every single time. Every single time, it never fails. And I just like to tell myself that they're going for the best guy, you got to get him out first. And so that's what I tell myself to cope with it. But basically, I get fired up, I'm the first guy out, and then I'm the cheerleader for the rest of the Dream Team the entire time. And that was my experience, and even with that, it was still such a blast. It was so much fun. And then, fast forward a couple more years, I actually came on staff at Northpoint. And what I get to do is I get to work with our Sunday morning team in creating the adult experience. So if you've ever been on a Sunday morning, or your parents have been, I get to work with that team to create that experience. I love what I get to do, and what's cool is our entire team gets to come to boot camp and hang out with you guys. And really quick, I just want to do a quick shout out to the production team back in the booth. They are amazing. These guys are getting up early, they're staying late, they are doing everything they can to create a great experience for you guys, so quick shout out to them. But we get to come every single year. And a few years ago, we hadn't ever really done like a full band, like this whole setup, and a few years ago we decided to do a full band, and it was amazing. I mean, here's a picture. T. Stearns was there, she was jumping around, it was a blast. And I don't know if you can see this little guy right here, but that's me on the drums. And I was playing drums that year. And I remember night 4, it was the very last song of boot camp. And we had kind of improvised and said, let's do this song instead. And our lead singer, not Taylor, our lead singer had decided he was going to do it. It was his first time doing this song, though. And about halfway through, some of you probably remember this, but he completely forgot the lyrics. And I'm looking at our guitar player and our bass player, and we have like no clue what's going on. We just keep playing. But what was so cool about this moment is I look out at the crowd to see if like anybody notices how lost we are. And everybody is just like jumping up and down, going nuts. And it was to the point that like we were on the second floor, and it was to the point where the ground was literally like pulsing up and down. Like I didn't know if we were gonna make it that night, but it was so fun. We just kept playing for like 5 more minutes, and people just kept jumping. It was fantastic. But we finally ended, and I'll never forget that moment at boot camp. It was so much fun seeing that. And that year, coincidentally, I was in a cabin with a group of 8th grade guys who were going into their freshman year. And with that, I loved hanging out with them, and I decided to become a small group leader at Inside Out. And I've been a small group leader for these guys for a couple years now. They're now juniors going into senior year. And yes. And I love my guys. It is so fun being their small group leader. And I got to give credit where credit is due, though, because, we get up on stage, and, Jeremy Geis gets up on stage, and he tells, hey, guys, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Like, here are all the rules, all the policies, essentially, right? And my guys are really responsible for, like, all of those rules. Like, those weren't rules before, and then they came up with an idea, and they did something, and now it's a rule. For example, I don't know if you guys have ever known this, but a mattress does not belong on a roof. So, this was a couple years back. One of my guys is credited with this. This is that whole, like, don't mess with people's stuff thing. Like, he obviously didn't listen, or he created that rule. But, this was years ago, and there had to be a conversation with this guy to go, hey, why did you put him out? And he's like, I just thought it would be cool. Like, I thought that's totally fine. And I'm not going to tell you guys who it is. His name is Sam Lacey, but yeah. And so my guys are credited with a lot of those rules. One more fun experience or story. A couple months ago, we had My Life retreat weekend, and I woke up on the morning of the last day or whatever, and I woke up and checked, Snapchat because they were blowing it up, and I look and I see this picture right here. And Jackson was gracious enough to let me share that picture, but I guess he liked sleeping with pizza on his face, and I'm not really going to say anything else about that story, but that is my guys. Those are my guys. I love getting to be a small group leader. I have a co-leader. His name is Steve. You've probably met him because he's like the most social guy here. And I love getting to co-lead, and we've had so many great experiences over the years, great small group time, great time connecting, fun stories, things like that. And I think when I think about the past 10 years and all of these boot camps that kind of add up for me, like for me, it's the reason I keep coming back over and over again is because boot camp for me like really embodies this word that this whole series is called and that we're talking about tonight and throughout this week, this word, irresistible. Boot camp for me, I first came, maybe you're here and you didn't grow up in church or anything, and I was in your shoes as well, and I first came, and boot camp was like an open door, a front door for me to faith and God and Christianity and all those things, and I loved it. Like, I thought it was so interesting. I loved being here, the games, the songs, like everything we do was so much fun, and it was irresistible for me. It was what I think the church should be. But so often I think we put God and faith and Christianity and church into this category of it's boring or it's kind of an obligation or it's not really that helpful. When in reality, what Jordan talked about last night and throughout this whole week we're talking about is that if God is real and Jesus is who he claimed to be, when in reality, it's the most irresistible thing that we can possibly spend our life being a part of. And that's what I found to be true. And when you boil everything away and you kind of look at the center of, okay, what's at the heart of this whole thing called Christianity or God or faith or whatever it is, at the heart of it is an irresistible story. It's a story, and it's a story about a man. He was a carpenter, and it's a story about a man that we're familiar with named Jesus. And I realize when we say the name Jesus, there's a lot of different things that probably come up. Maybe for you, it's just a guy in a history book. Maybe for you, you believe a lot of things about who he is. You grew up in church, or maybe you're somewhere in between. Wherever you're at, what's interesting for us to kind of agree upon and know is that regardless of what we believe about Jesus, is that he was a guy who changed the world, that Jesus' story was a story that changed the world. You go back 2,000 years ago to the story of Jesus. He was one guy. In a span of 3 years, he walked around and taught to crowds of people, and it was a geographic area similar to like San Marcos to Cedar Park. That's the span of area that he covered in that time. That's it. And he changed the world forever. He put a mark in history, changed the trajectory of what we know modern day. I think there's a lot of things that we know and understand that are as a result of what he did and what he said. Because of that, I think his story probably changed your life a little bit. And to go a step further, I think his story is a story that can change your life. And tonight, what I want to ask you guys to do is just to kind of lean in a little bit as we talk about this story. And my hope for you is that when you lean in and we look at this irresistible story of Jesus, that perhaps it can change your life in the same way that it's changed mine and so many others. But with any great story, there's context, there's setup. And Jordan talked about this a little bit earlier today. But the setup of this is really when you take this book, the Bible, and you look at it in these two different halves. You have the Old Testament and the New Testament, right? This is a story of Jesus. The Old Testament is essentially the story about the nation of Israel. It was an agreement between God and the nation of Israel. It was based on commands, over 600 commands that the nation of Israel, the Jewish people, had to follow to get to God. And it was temporary. It was just temporary. It wasn't the period on the end of the sentence. It was just temporary. It was a means to an end. And that's the Old Testament. And then you have the New Testament, the story of Jesus and the early church. And the New Testament is for everyone, all nations, all people. It's a new agreement based on 2 commands, love God and love people. It sums all the commands up, and it's permanent. It's a period on the end of the sentence. It is the end to which there was a means. So 2,000 years ago, Jesus shows up on the scene, and he starts talking about all these new things, and they're brand new ideas for all the people. When you put yourselves in the shoes of people who listened to Jesus, they had no idea what he was talking about. All they knew was the old covenant, the old agreement, the Old Testament, the old scriptures, that kind of thing. And so Jesus shows up, and he's talking about all these new ideas, and people are flocking to him. For some reason, they find the things that he says to be irresistible. And then there's one point in Jesus' story where he kind of captures everybody. He captures what he is really all about. It's one of his most famous teachings, or one of his most famous conversations that he has in his entire ministry. And I want to show it to you guys because it unpacks who Jesus is and what he was all about. It says this. It says, Luke, one of Jesus' followers, writes this. He says, on one occasion, an expert in the law, a lawyer, stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? This is a lawyer. This guy is smart, and he knows how to look for loopholes. And so he's asking Jesus a question. Hey, Jesus, how do I get to God, essentially? Can you answer that for me? Jesus replies, what is written in the law? He replied, how do you read it? See, he's brilliant. He responds to the guy's question with a question. He says essentially, hey, you're smart. You're a lawyer. You tell me, how do we get to God? And then this guy quotes from the Old Testament, something that the people who are listening, the Jewish people who are listening, and Jesus and the lawyer were all familiar with. And here's what the guy said. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. This was the right answer. So Jesus replies, you've answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. But then we discover the lawyer had a second question, kind of another layer deeper. This was the question that he actually wanted to ask in the first place. And he says this, but he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Essentially, Jesus, what do I need to do to check the box? Tell me exactly who I need to love so I can make sure I love that person so I can get to God. Tell me the minimum amount I need to do. It was kind of a legalistic approach. And then Jesus launches into something called a parable. And a parable was essentially a story. It was a fictional story to illustrate a point. And this is one of the most disorienting, mind-bending parables of his entire ministry. So he's telling a story, and look at the story that Jesus tells to respond to this question. He He says, in reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. So he was a Jewish man. When he was attacked by robbers, they stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. This Jewish guy's going from point A to point B. He gets beat up, stripped, and left half dead. And then here's what happens. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So this priest is going down that same road. He sees the guy over here. He sees that he's half dead, but he's a Jewish priest, which means that if this guy died, he'd have to do all these rituals on the body. And so he decides, I am not going to deal with that. I don't want to get involved. It's too inconvenient. And then another person goes by. So too, a Levite, a specific Jewish descendant, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. Another guy goes by, sees the body, says, nope, not going to help. Pass by on the other side. And the crowd listening to this parable, the crowd listening to Jesus goes, oh, you know what? They are not loving their neighbor very well. Those are not neighborly loving people. And then Jesus completely flips the script on them. Here's what he says. But a Samaritan. And Samaritan might not be significant to us in today's age, but back then, this was such a radical thing to say. Because a Samaritan was like a half-blood Jewish person. They had descendants who were Jewish and from another ethnicity, and the full-blooded Jewish people that Jesus is talking to, they loathed Samaritans. They hated them. They considered them less than. And so Jesus says, but a Samaritan, and all their ears perk up. And I want to pause for a second because I want to kind of put this into perspective for us. And a quick question for you. Raise your hand in here if you are a UT fan. Yes, I went to college there. I'm a UT fan as well. And then I need somebody to tell me, just yell out the answer, who is the enemy of UT? If you said A&M, you're wrong. They're OU, correct. We don't even give the Aggies the time of day. But OU is the enemy of Texas. And they play every year in October. They play at the Texas Red River Showdown, and it looks something like this. This is what the game is like. I've been to one of them before. And raise your hand if you've been to this game before. Any of you? Yeah, a couple of you guys. Okay. So you know this game is nuts. It is on fire. It is so crazy. And one of the coolest parts of this game is right here in the middle, there's this, you see this sea of burnt orange, and then you see this color that it's like maroon or red. They don't really know what it is, but it's like this color is something else. I don't know what that is. But anyways, this right here in the middle, you have Texas fans that are standing shoulder to shoulder with OU fans. They might or might not be under the influence, I don't know, but they are ready to throw down if needed. If the game's going one way or the other, these fans are ready to throw down right here in the middle. And I've never actually been here because I don't want my 5'4" stature to intimidate the OU fans, but I've heard it's crazy. I've heard it's absolutely nuts. And when you go back to the story that Jesus is telling about the Samaritan, think about it like this. Picture that Jesus is talking to a group of Texas fans. And he says, hey, there was this Texas fan who was beat up by robbers and left for dead. And then a Texas fan, another one, walked by. Maybe it was a coach. And he sees him and he leaves him there. And then another one walks by. Maybe it's an alumni. He sees him and he leaves him there. And all the Texas fans are thinking, man, that's not what we do as fans. That's not loving people. And then Jesus says, but an OU fan. And everybody perks up and they say, whoa, Jesus, time out. Are you about to make an OU fan the hero of this story? No. You're not allowed to do that. But that's exactly what Jesus was doing to this group of Jewish people. When he said, but a Samaritan, this is what happened. He said, but a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. So the OU fan is the hero of the story. The OU fan helps the Texas fan. And where this analogy breaks down is this is bigger than just sports. This is a matter of race and ethnicity and these familial roots that go so deep where there's hatred and loathing on both sides. And so the crowd hears this. They hear Jesus say, but a Samaritan, and they begin to lose their mind. I would imagine they begin to stand up and their fists begin to clench. And then he takes it a step further. He says, he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine to clean the wounds. So the Samaritan is cleaning the Jewish man's wounds. Then he put the man on his own donkey, which means he had to walk on foot, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. I would imagine the crowd's beginning to stir. Jesus, you're going too far. You can't say things like this. He takes it a step further. The next day, he took out 2 denarii, which is equivalent to 2 months' worth of stay at an inn, and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him. the Samaritan said, "And when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." And the crowd is speechless at this point. And then Jesus completely redefines who a neighbor is to them with this question. He looks the lawyer in the face and says this: "Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" Lawyer, you asked the question earlier, who's my neighbor? Well, here's a scenario for you. Which of these three do you think is a neighbor to this man? And the lawyer is stumped. The whole crowd is stumped. And look how the lawyer responds to him. He says, "The one who had mercy on him." He couldn't even say the word Samaritan. The one who had mercy on him. Jesus said, "Go and do likewise." This is how you are to love people as a result. See, this is so fundamentally and radically different than anything else these people had ever heard in their life before. We might be familiar with things like this, but it was so different. Jesus tore down racial walls, and he introduced a sweeping new ethic, this revolutionary idea of what it means to love. So often we look on social media or in our classrooms or just in culture as a whole, and we see all of these movements or these organizations and these things. They're all about loving everyone, loving all races, all people, all genders, all sexualities. We see all of these things about loving everyone. And oftentimes we attribute that to like a modern day concept, like, oh, this is a new idea. Loving everyone is a new idea. When in reality, 2,000 years ago, Jesus introduced this idea in a radical way to a group of people on this day. One of my favorite authors, he says it like this. I love what he says. He says, "This insistence on the absolutely indiscriminate, meaning everybody, nature of compassion within Jesus' kingdom is the dominant perspective of almost all of Jesus' teaching." Meaning when you look at the narrative of Jesus time and time and time and time again, you are introduced to this idea of loving everybody radically. And you might be in here and you might be thinking, well, Jeremy, then why do I have this experience? Why have I been to church, or why have I been on the other side of a Christian before? And I've been judged, I've been blamed, I've been hurt, I've been ridiculed. If that's you and you're in here and you would say that, then what I would say is that I am so sorry. Because that is not your fault, that is our fault. And that is in no way representative of Jesus' irresistible story and what he stood for. Because Jesus, as we know, is for everyone. Jesus is for everyone. That includes everybody on this planet right here who has existed or is existing right now. It includes everybody in the United States. It includes everybody in the great state of Texas. It includes everybody at Riverbend Retreat Center. And it includes everybody in this picture right here. Jesus is for everyone, which means that Jesus is for you. Jesus is for you, regardless of what you're bringing in here, regardless of what you've done, are doing, or will do, regardless of your background, regardless of what you believe about Jesus. Jesus is for you. And through his life, his death, his resurrection that proved he was who he claimed to be, and that when we put our trust in that, Jesus makes available to you and to me a personal relationship with God. Emphasis here on the word relationship because we live in a transactional world. So often we think we have to do something to get something, whereas in this reality, in what Jesus is introducing, that's not how it is. He already did everything that we needed to get to God, and he made possible a personal relationship where you can relate to, you can talk to God. And so my question for you that I want to talk about is that when it comes to the God of the universe, when it comes to the God who created the 300 billion stars in our galaxy and the 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe, when it comes to the God who wrote the irresistible story of Jesus, my question that I want to leave you with tonight is this: what does it look like for you to take a step in the direction of Jesus? What does it look like for you? Not the person sitting next to you, not your friend, not your brother, not your sister. What does it look like for you to take a step in the direction of Jesus? And really quick, if you don't hear anything else I say tonight, I want you to hear this. Lean in, I want you to hear this. I think this is the most important question that you can answer in your entire life, hands down. I think it's the most important question, because if God is real, and if Jesus is who he claimed to be, that changes everything about your story. That means that you have meaning and value and purpose, and that means that you can have a relationship with God. And so I would urge you, I think you'll be glad you did, to answer this question honestly for yourself. What does it look like for you to take a step in the direction of Jesus? And I started with some stories, and I want to end with one as well. There's a guy here who was sitting in your seats not too long ago, and his name is Clark. You guys might know Clark. Here's a picture of him up here. And Clark is a media intern, and he's an OU fan, but we love him still. And Clark is awesome, and he has a really cool story. You see, he came to camp not too long ago, a couple of years back, and he showed up at camp, and his mom dropped him off, and he literally had no clue it was a church camp. Like, he didn't know until he got here. Imagine that. And Clark, heard a lot of messages throughout the week, heard about this Jesus guy, the story of Jesus. And he talked to Jordan. He had a conversation with him one night, and he told Jordan, hey, I just want you to know, I love this place. This place is awesome. I feel welcome. I'm having fun. I'm having a blast. But I don't really believe any of this. I don't really buy into any of this stuff. Which for me, I'm I love that Clark could say that. We always talk about wanting to make people belong before they ever have to believe. And that's a perfect scenario right there of that irresistible church thing. But Clark said that to Jordan. And then throughout the school year, Clark kept coming back to Inside Out. He came to Inside Out. And as he was at Inside Out, he began to ask questions. These are real questions that you and I probably have or have right now. And they're questions about science and faith, philosophical questions about God and other world religions and things like that. And he began to unpack these questions. And then at the same time, it's coming to the end of the school year, and he goes to camp again. And around this time, his family had a few struggles in their life. And he watched his dad turn in the direction and begin to take steps towards a relationship with Jesus. And Clark, watching this happen, kind of just brought forward in his life, after asking all these questions, Clark decided to put his faith and trust in Jesus. And through this, he found that he could have meaning and purpose and a personal relationship with God. And it changed his life forever. And it's why he's here today trying to love on you guys and give you an opportunity to go down the same path that he went down. And the reason I love Clark's story so much is because he was so honest with where he was at. I think oftentimes we think that we can't bring our doubts or our questions or our struggles to God, when in reality, God wants us to do that. And Clark was so honest with where he was at. He just said, here's where I'm at. And then he took step after step after step after step until he discovered that he could have a personal relationship with God. And I don't think Clark was here by accident all those years ago. And to be honest, I don't think any of you are here by accident either. In fact, I think that tonight and throughout this week, I think that perhaps the purpose could be to ask this question to yourself of what does it look like to take a step in the direction of Jesus? What do you need to unpack maybe in small group? What struggles do you need to talk about? What questions do you need to bring to the surface that are boiling in you? What does it look like for you to take a step? Not the whole thing, not jumping in, just a step in the direction of Jesus. I think it's the most important question that you can ask in your life. And I think you'll be glad you did. And I think that Jesus' story will change your story as well. Would you pray with me right now? Heavenly Father, we just thank you that we have this ability to have a personal relationship with you, a relationship where we can talk to you about anything. We can talk to you about our struggles, our concerns, our questions. And God, thank you that you sent Jesus as a conduit for us to connect with you and for us to know you more and for us to have this relationship accessible to us. God, would you just open us up to potentially bringing those struggles, those doubts, those concerns to the surface and taking a step in your direction. God, we thank you so much for this time to be with people we love, with family throughout this week. Would you just continue to help us have a blast and connect with you? In Jesus' name, amen.
All right, we're about to get on to team time. We're going to further these discussions. Captains, we will have team time until around 8:45, and then you're good to go. Get ready for Colorama, and then be outside by 9 o'clock.